Furious Driving, proud to be supported by Diamond Bright, protecting, cleaning and caring for the Furious fleet and for yours with 10% off using code FD10. Follow the links in the description below. Hello and welcome to Furious Driving. And well, today I'm back in another Suzuki Swift. Yes, recently we drove the original Mark 1 Swift and today we're in its successor, the Mark 2. And if you like even more reviews of interesting, unusual and crucially very, very rare 80s, 90s and older and newer cars, then please do hit like and subscribe and check out the back catalogue for some of the incredible cars we've driven over the years. Now, on to the Swift Mark II. Now, obviously, if you're watching this in Japan, which I think about 0.3% of my viewers might be, you'll be looking at this and thinking that's not a Swift, that's a Cultus, a Mark II Cultus. And that's the indicator on the right hand side, not the wipers. Whoops. Like on my 1989 MX5, of course. It was still the Japanese way at this point. This in Japan was the Cultus Mark II. In the UK, Europe, much of the rest of the world, the Swift Mark II. We'll come back to that little point later on because there were places where it wasn't that either. Wow, Suzuki Carry. From the outside, this is clearly an all-new car. 88, 89, they ended production of the Mark 1 and began production of this, the Mark 2. I got the indicator right that time. And it looks worlds apart. There's only like 4.5 years between the two models going on sale. 1984, the first one, 1988 in Japan, 1989 over here in the UK for the Mark II. But they look like they're from completely different eras. The Mark I was nothing but squares and wedges and solid lines. It looked pure 1980s. This though is pure 90s. It's lots of simplified design, lots of elegant curves, lots of simple and organic shapes, which is the hallmark of 90s design, really. However, that does belie the fact, oh my goodness, there is a beautiful, I couldn't say if it's a Rolls or a Bentley going around there. It's a Rolls. However, that belies the fact that, like the Mark I, this is built on the GM M platform. Now, the M platform was actually developed out of the Mark I, for the Mark I in fact. GM gave up their ownership rights to that platform for a stake in Suzuki back in 1983, and then it was licensed around the world as a GM product as well as a Suzuki product. The Mark II, though, was built on the same platform, but with lots and lots of significant upgrades. For example, it now has independent coil suspension all around, which significantly improves the ride. And although it's completely new structure above the chassis, they've reworked the cabin and the boot space, so we've got lots more space inside here, more elbow room, more leg room, more headroom, and the boot is a lot bigger as well. Hauling us down the road at the moment is a 1 litre 3-cylinder engine. That's a 6-valve motor. Let's go down Portway. As we poon down Portway, you can hear it thrum. I am 3-pot, hear me thrum. I've driven to an infant school with a load of cameras in the car. I'm going to get on a register here, aren't I? Let's not be doing this. So this thing makes 53 horsepower and 76 newton meters of torque. I mean, it's got 0 to 60 of about 15.9 seconds. Oh, I'm back at the roundabout again. And a top speed of about 90. Let's hurl this thing around the roundabout, and now it's got all coil sprung Indy suspension. See how well we get around here. Oh, much better. We're starting to squeak at 26 miles an hour, so we've got about a 25% increase in turning power. A little bit of understeer again, but much more control than in the Mark I. Right, let's pull over and have a little look around the interior of this thing and just explore and enjoy that wonderful 90s design aesthetic. beep, beep, beep. You can tell the 90s has happened because the car is beeping and we just had the keys in it. Very annoying development in car design. Looking around the outside of this thing though, it's interesting to think that this is still a Swift, because visually it's got a lot more in common with things like the Suzuki Baleno, which came later, than it does with the previous generation Mark 1 Swift. Everything is so much more curvy. The chunky square sticking out bumpers of the Mark 1 are now kind of integrated and molded around it. Everything's body colour. We've gone back to gingicators though, which look fabulous on this thing. The Mark 1 we drove in the previous video, that was a mega top spec one, so it had clear indicators which were integrated because it was a late 80s one. This car is a very early noughties one, 2001. It's about 2 years for the end of production, having been in production for about 13 years, which is astonishing. But the design is now so much more curvy and sleek. Well, there's elements of Honda FRV, Toyota Corolla, all kinds of these kind of Japanese cars, bigger cars I should say, into this. And it's interesting, this huge big window on the 3-door, which does actually pop out at the back, is actually gently curved in as well. It's not a flat piece of glass. There's a lot of expense going on here. One thing I do find interesting, apart from the large rubbing strip down the side above the door moulding, which is for NVH and stopping vibration and flexing, the hubcaps. Like the steering wheel, they're not logoed. This particular car, I've got to say, this is an incredibly rare car in any sense of the word. There's only about 470 or so left in the UK. This one though is one of the best, if not the best, and it belongs to Suzuki UK's heritage fleet, so it's about as good as you're possibly going to get. But yeah, no logo on the hubcaps, and I'm assuming these are the original hubcaps, 21,000 miles, very, very unfiddled with example of the car. Logoed obviously on the front, and of course on the tailgate, which folds down all the way to the tail lights, of course, where we've got a Swift GLS logo and Suzuki badge on the back, and a little recess so you can get your fingers inside. And it feels like you're squeezing a rubbery button. It's not, it's just the rubber of the boot seal. You've got to pull the tag inside or turn the key. One little styling detail I do love about the exterior of this car is, like on so many 1980s Japanese cars, and of course the Rovers, which are, you know, shared design with the Hondas, the aerial goes down into the A-post when you retract it. Let's look at the interior. Start with the doors, and I feel like these door handles are almost exactly the same as on the Mark 1, but they're... This is a 3-door version of the Swift. There was a 5-door version as well, and I believe even a convertible in some markets and in the saloon in the US, because they like hatchbacks in the Americas, saloon versions of hatchbacks. So long door because it is a 3-door. In the previous generation it was already pretty advanced because we had no body coloured metal anywhere. This time we've taken it a step further. We've got more plastic, hard plastic at the top, then a lot more fabric, and I'm going to talk about this fabric in a second because this kind of stuff is an obsession of mine. Got a little door pull, we've got window lockout for the passenger window if you don't like the person sat to your left, electric windows for both front windows, auto drop for the driver's one, a teeny tiny little door pocket, and of course we've got the interestingly sculpted door handles, the little door release, and we've still got the chunky lock as on all 90s, 80s, even 70s Japanese cars, with the bright orange thing indicated to show that the door is locked. Stepping fully into the car over what is now plastic kick panel, and we've also got a pull release for the boot, which wasn't available in the previous generation as I recall. We've got more good seats. The previous generation Swift had really good seats, so kind of wide, buckety affairs that looked very 1980s. These ones look very 1990s because it's still buckety, a bit narrower, still very buckety with hard, kind of squarish edges. But this fabric, this is like a cartoonist interpretation of cave paintings. I love 90s seat fabric, so it's just so fun and inventive. You know, the 1990s just felt more real. Everything today feels digital and false and so incredibly high definition it doesn't really feel real. It's gone through real and out the other side, so it feels fake, it's so real. This has got a real tactile realness that makes you just want to be there. It's fabulous. So lovely seats, everything very grey though. Not a lot of colour in this interior at all apart from the warning lights, and you'll only ever see them when you turn the car on first of all, because it's a Suzuki, it won't go wrong. Starting at the top, we've got a small T-shelf, bit of a T-shelf downgrade from the Mark 1. Small area for snacks in the middle, but we do have a soup container area, so if you want to have a little bit of minestrone on the move, you can pop it in here, a long straw, link sort of 4 or 5 McDonald's paper straws to there, quickly suck that out of there. You can have your snack lunch on the way, although drink it quickly because it rolls, as we've found out. Anywho, right, the dashboard. We've got air vents to the left, air vents in the centre, no longer got the incredible self-closing, fully louvered vents that we had on the original, but they are still pretty decent. We've not got air conditioning because this is a GLS, not mega top spec to have aircon on it, but we do have the standard issue clunky slidey controls for our air ventilation. They've never had radios from the outset. They've always kind of installed something locally here in the UK. This is a radio cassette, which is obviously the right thing for a 2001 car, which this is what this is. Below which we've got a digital clock, although interestingly both in the shade of green that matches. A large ashtray, never been smoked in, which is nice. Little 12-volt socket and slide out cup holders, which is convenient. Better than an E39, I'll say. Underneath that, a largish area for dumping stuff, and of course I've got our 5-speed manual gearbox and a proper pulley-on ERV handbrake. Up to the binnacle, and now everything is no longer, as on the previous generation, kind of separate and square and angular. It's all floating and flowing and organic because 90s design, and so our instrument binnacle is under a large semicircle. Much the same number of instruments though. We've got our speedometer still going to 130, we've got our redlining rev counter here, 6,500 RPM for the red line. We've got our fuel and our temperature gauge and a few little warning lights. No longer a wrench it up out and pull it out, the steering column type hazard warning lights, a more traditional push button for that. And we've got our wipers on the left and our indicators on the right, as I think we found out at the beginning of the road test. Interestingly, I'm going to say the word interesting and mean it, this steering wheel is like a fairly solid rubber chunky thing. Is it a split twin spoke or is it a 4-spoke? I don't know, I'm going to go 4-spoke. It's not branded, which is quite curious, and neither are the hubcaps. And this isn't something that would have been replaced. This is a very low mileage car. So I'm wondering if it's because the car was sold under lots of brands. As a cost saving measure, they didn't put a brand on the steering wheel. It does have the horn though. It's not as up and coming power parp as the previous generation. It's more of a, I've made my mark and now I'm happy with where I am parp. It's a satisfied parp, I think. One thing I didn't mention in this interior is the smell. Much like the first one, it has a delicious, dry, sweet smell, which it smells, I don't know, like flowers in the desert or something, but it is very, very characteristic of 80s, 90s cars and Japanese cars in particular, and I really, really like it. It's something to do with the fabric and the carpet and the stuffing. Really, really nice. Anyway, as I mentioned when we were driving, although it's the same footprint underneath, the same chassis as before, we've got a lot more room. It feels like we've got more leg room, we've got a lot more headroom, we've got a nice vinyl headlining now. Previously we had a chunky, clear interior light. We've now got a slightly more integrated looking affair. We've got our sun visors, of course. I even have a mirror. They're throwing all the toys at us. We've now got a couple of rocker switches for the rear wash wipers and a push button for the rear screen heater, and we've got more push buttons for the rear fog light. Oh, that's interesting. It's not a momentary switch. You push it on and then push the off button for off rather than the same button twice. That is a curiosity. Electric mirrors, of course, and adjustable height on the headlights. This car does suddenly feel very grown up indeed. Oh, it's beeping at me again. I'll leave it switched on. Now, because this is a 3-door, in order to access the back seat, we need to flippity the front seat. Then we've got pockets as previously. This will be easier in the 5-door, of course. We have still got 3 seat belts. We've got a lap belt and 2 3-point harnesses, which is a big upgrade on the previous one. And we've got, well, a fairly decent size back seat area. We've even got little armrest and little speakers. So yeah, lots of stuff going on. Let's have a quick look in the boot, because that was also meant to be bigger as well. So yes, the bootle area. Now, big change here. Where's the boot lip itself? So first of all, let's have a quick look at the tailgate with this really interesting, a bit like on a Honda FRV, the glass comes down and then goes vertical in the glass itself. I imagine that's a cause of breakages in these windows. It means you've got a big wiper arm, and also the washer jet has to pop up a really long way so it can make it around that curve. I'm getting pretty boring here. Also around the back of the car we've got a reminiscent nod back to the previous generation, where the square lights and a little curve off to the bumper. Now that curve is built into the bumper itself, and the lights of course are a lot wider, smoother, more 90s, and elegant is the wrong word. Organic. Let's go with organic again. So, a bigger boot. It does look deeper, it does look a little bit wider. However, the lip has now moved from down here at bumper level to up here. So, handy if you want to transport a lot of tropical fish, line it in plastic, fill it with water and take your fish home. Awkward if you're trying to shift paving slabs, because if you want to try and get them over the lip, you're going to do your back in, frankly. And we do have a 50-50 split fold seat again, as before, probably exactly the same structure underneath the padding, I would imagine. But yeah, if you want to get long, big things in there, so the washing machine test, that is going to be almost impossible because of this weird aperture they've given it. A very strange design decision. Obviously, you do get the big wide lights, looks really quite cool, and you get better structural rigidity, so you get less flex in the body shell by having this big metal panel down the back. So perhaps better for driving, but definitely worse for load space. And also because we've got the independent coil spring suspension now, we do have this extra little intrusion into the boot. The leaf springs of the original wouldn't have done that. Oh, and I also mentioned we'd have got extra wee speakers here in the side of the parcel shelf. Right, so getting back on the road again. I'm gonna crack a window, it's boiling in here. This car was revealed in Japan in September 1988. It looks very 1990s for a car revealed in the late 80s, but them's the breaks. And it has the rare accolade of being a car that was then revealed in Europe in Brussels in 1988, in October, going on sale shortly afterwards. And like the Mark 1, it was sold all over the world with many of the same names, the Holden Barista or wherever it was. But significantly, this car was also renamed the Geo Metro, a car so slow it got a cameo in The Simpsons.
Nettie? Nettie!
He's cheating on us! Come on, Matt, move this thing!
I can't! It's a Geo!
If you're wondering, I'm driving around Milton Keynes and there are nothing but roundabouts here. No stretch of road here is long enough to do a 0 to 60 on. So what's this thing like to drive? Well, I've already mentioned that suspension is really rather good. It's got a nice understeery, safe feel to it. It rolls quite happily into a corner without too much drama. Steering feels like it's power assisted now, unlike in the previous one, but it's still quite heavy though. The brakes, brake test. Wow, that stops up pretty sharp. I believe it's drums at the back, discs at the front. There was a GTI version with discs all round. If I jump to the primary school again, and with its low belt line and tall windows, the visibility really is extremely good. And in this car we've got the standard 5-speed manual box, which is the staple of anything half decent to drive in the 90s. I believe there was still an automatic as an option, of course. I think it's a 4-speed now rather than the 3-speed we got in the Mark 1. It's quite good. It's a little bit rubbery going into some of the gears, but generally nice and positive. And the pedals are extremely light under your foot, so you can dip the clutch with just a little toe. Now, interestingly, although we obviously associate Suzuki with Japanese-built cars because it's a Japanese company, this generation for Europe was built in Hungary. They built an all-new factory specifically for, well, building this car. But because they didn't want the quality to deviate from the Japanese spec, which was notably and laudably high, they set aside a budget of $230 million, bear in mind this is in the late 1980s, to fly every member of staff over to Japan and train them in the Japanese way of doing things, the quality way of doing things. So these cars are indistinguishable in their build quality from the home market built cars, which is an incredible thing to do. But bear in mind this car, okay, it's a low mileage car with 21,000 miles on it. This is over 20 years old, and the only thing that's rattling is my camera mount in the back seat. This is remarkably good, really is good. And on the road, everything, the controls all feel just so well put together. The positive clicks of the indicator, the way the gearbox snicks across the gate. This was a car that was designed well and then implemented well. Often cars will fall down at one of those stages. The Rover SD1, brilliantly designed, but thrown together by angry brummies who didn't want to be there, so the car kind of failed. This was the Mk2 Swift, or Cultus, or Holden Barina, Metro, Sprint, the Envoy, the Esteem, the Forza, the Amenity, the Envy. It was a lot of cars, but it was also the longest running of all of the Swift generations. 13 years in production, from 1989 to 2003 here in the UK, but actually for quite a lot longer in some other parts of the world. I think it ran up to about 2006 or 7 in Indonesia, and in the UK it wasn't a huge seller by, say, Fiesta standards, but it was still a big seller for Suzuki, shifting about 5,000 units a year. And at the time this car was on sale, it was 6,750 quid. So, not a terrible amount of money, really. And it looks, bizarrely, parked side by side, this looks an awful lot bigger than the Mark 1. Perhaps it's the fact it's painted bright red, which is actually the name of the colour, rather than the pale metallic blue of the Mark 1. Or perhaps it's just a more bulbous bodywork, but it's only about 20mm longer, and it's virtually the same width. But it does have that bigger feel, but cars were growing, but it was going up against later model Fiestas and Micras and Starlets. And now, of course, the Corsa had replaced the Nova, so that was another step up. Every one of the competitors had come along in the game and improved dramatically. And by the time this thing was coming off the market, we even had things like the Mini Cooper coming in as a rival, which really did raise the stakes for the small car in a dramatic way. And that was where, in the next generation after this, the Swift Sport was born. And I've often said, pound for pound, the Swift Sport is perhaps the better of the two cars. Certainly it's better in terms of build quality, and it's pretty comparable in terms of driving fun as well. So what do you think? Is this one of the greatest small cars of the 1990s that no one remembers? Let me know in the comments. If you've enjoyed this, please, as always, hit like and of course subscribe, and join me again next time driving something completely different.